Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Padajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Padajana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari. Yamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mr. Bhad Paramahansa Pradikacharya Ashtotar the Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pradikacharya Ashtotar the Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Bhakta Glenn, can you give me a little more? It's like hardly anything. Thank you. And welcome to you, Suresh. Hare Krishna. This is his 4,381st Bhagavad Gita class. I've been keeping track. I don't remember when he wasn't in class. Hare Krishna. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On the 17th day of November 2020 in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The volume is good. Thank you. And we are in the third chapter entitled Karma Yoga, text 39, page 175. Isn't it? Oh, we did 39 already? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Text 40. Forgive me. Page 176. Indriyani mano buddhir asyadishtanam uchyate etava mohayatyesha jnanamavritya dehinam. Indriyani mano buddhir asyadishtanam uchyate Etavamohayatyesha Jnanamavritya dehinam Indriyani manobuddhir Asyadishtanam uchyate Etavamohayatyesha Jnanamavritya dehinam. Go ahead, Prakash. Indriyani manobuddhir Asyadishtanam uchyate Etavamohayatyesha Jnanamavritya dehinam. Glenn, go ahead. Indriyani manobuddhir Asyadishtanam uchyate Etavamohayatyesha Jnanamavritya dehinam. Indriyani manobuddhir Asyadishtanam uchyate Etavamohayatyesha Jnanam avritya dehinam. Anyone else? Okay. Indriyani, the senses, manaha, the mind, buddhihi, the intelligence, asya, of this lust, adishtanam, sitting place. Uchyate is called, etai, by all these, vimohiyati, bewilders, eshaha, this lust, jnanam, knowledge, avritya, covering, dehinam, of the embodied. Translation: the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. Purport: the enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next-door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 10:84-13. All right. Yasyatma buddhi kunapetvi dhatuke swadi kalatrati shabhoma ijyadi yathirtha buddhi salile nakahichid janeshu bhiggeshu sa eva gokaraha. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is to be considered like an ass or a cow. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. Page 176. Where's your sidekick? Or are you his sidekick? Is he cooking? Okay. Just wanted to know. Okay. So, did I do Om Jnana yet? I did that already. No. I didn't. Okay. I'm sorry. My brain is not working right. So, this is a very important verse. Let's look at the context as usual. Arjuna asks the question, what impels us to act against our own best interests? As if by force. He says, aniccan means like we don't even desire it. Is that we have a desire to be healthy and happy, and even a spiritual desire buried in there somewhere. But we also have these other desires that are dictated by this lust. And so there's a battle. And here he's describing what happens when the lust wins out. And it's as if it's against our own best interests, as if by force. We're forced to act. So that's the question. And Krishna answers, it is lust only, Arjuna, which transforms into anger when frustrated, born of the motive passion, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy in this world. So it's interesting, because after all, they're on a battlefield. So battlefield means you have your soldiers and you have the enemy. But he's saying, no, the enemy is completely different. The enemy is not these enemy soldiers, it's internal enemy, which is really what is keeping us bound here to this world and causing us so much suffering. So how does it work? So he says there's different degrees of covering, right? The fire is covered by smoke. That's the least covering. You can see some of the light of the fire through the smoke. Then you have the dust on the mirror, which can be a thick covering, and then the fetus in the womb, which is completely covered. So different levels down into lower species like that. So what happens, and this is the key verse here, 39, Avitam Gyanam Etina. This lust covers the innate knowledge of the soul. We should remember that this knowledge of ourselves as spirit and Krishna and a relationship, it's all in there, but it's buried. We haven't, it's so covered that we don't even know it's there. But that knowledge can be awakened by the process of bhakti. So this eternal enemy of the Jnanina. The Jnanina is the knower. That's us, the spirit soul. Covers our knowledge in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and burns like fire. Now, then the present verse. How does it do it? Well, it infects the different aspects of our being. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence. That's the import of this verse. And it's just like Prabhupada gives us, he sticks with this battlefield analogy, which is perfect. I remember when many of you may not remember, some of you are old enough. Yeah, over here, the ones with the white hair. The first Iraq War in 1990, that was like 30 years ago now. And I'm not going to get into the justification for the war, that's another thing. But they had some very developed air defenses. We have been supporting them for years, if you know the history. And so they had a fairly sophisticated army and so forth. So the first thing we did was knock out all the radar so that they couldn't see that we were coming and bombing them and stuff like that. That's a standard military thing. If they don't have their own air force that they can fight with you in the air, then you do that first. So that's similar to this. This lust knocks out your radar, your ability to understand yourself and God and all these things. And so then you're helpless. Therefore it takes over the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Now, how does that work? Well, lusty senses are kind of easy to understand. You get these demands from the senses to eat, right? And the eyes, each of the sense has its own, demands. So the senses it's fairly. How does it work in the mind? Well, the mind is scanning, through the eyes, through the ears, and what's pleasurable? Telling you, go for that, avoid that. Go for that, avoid that, ignore that. Go, you know what I mean? So the mind can be a real repository of lusty desire. And as I never tire to point out, this is understood by the advertising industry. Multi-billion dollars are spent in trying to infuse a desire into your mind that you will then eventually act on when a certain desire comes up. You may forget it. There's this whole art of subliminal advertising, They know when you're driving down, I-5 and there's so many billboards, you get to a certain point up in L.A., So they only have a few seconds of your attention, if that. So they have to grab it, oftentimes with some beautiful member of the opposite sex, what's that? And then they're selling you something, a beer, a car, whatever it may be, So you get that impression, then you forget about it. You go on with your business. It's not like you keep thinking about it. But the impression is in your mind. And then when it comes time to, buy a beer, They only get this beer. You don't even remember why, but you're associating it with that beautiful girl. You know what I mean? This is the art of advertising. So this is exactly what's being described here. The lust is taking over through the senses. All these desires are being implanted because we're enjoying beings. So if we're not going to enjoy our natural pleasure of serving Krishna, which is unlimited and doesn't burn like fire, but is also never satiated, But there's no downside. The downside here is that you stay bound up to this gross material body, which eventually just causes complete pain. Whether it's in the womb, or you're diseased, or you're about to die, or there's some threefold misery coming at you, it's always the body. You're going to be encased in this material body. So, and with the body comes the senses, with the senses come these material desires. So, and the intelligence department, all the ideas and the memories of things you once enjoyed. See, now animals don't, the lusty intelligence isn't there. They're acting more on instinct, moment to moment. And so therefore, because they don't have the ratiocination or the intelligence or the reason, they're not responsible for their activities. It's human beings who can understand right and wrong, and who have a responsibility to cultivate that understanding, who are responsible, who have karma. So that lion running after the antelope and catching him and killing him, he doesn't get bad karma. That's his nature, and he can go on to a next body. But when you come to the human form, you have to understand. But if your intelligence is just filled with all of these memories of previous enjoyments and plans to get new ones, then it's in the mode of passion, and you're stuck. That lust has taken over. The enemy, remember it's the enemy, Vairina, has taken over all the strategic points. And you're helpless. So how can we get out of it? It has to be the intelligence department, because that's the nearest to the soul. And that's from hearing. Like we can hear now, and then we hear also the method by which we can cure this lust. Now it's interesting that at the end of this chapter, which we may actually reach today, he talks about, thus, understanding yourself through your intelligence, that you're transcendental all this, conquer this enemy of lust, kama rupam durasaram. But he doesn't say exactly how. That's the next chapter. He says, I'm going to, he talks about the yoga. This yoga, what yoga is that? I didn't hear about really description of a yoga in the previous chapter. But it's the yoga of using the intelligence to control the senses and to link up to the Supreme. Because really, when you think about it, what are we doing when you chant Hare Krishna? Well, you're hopefully hearing, but hearing requires placing the attention, and that's a function of the intelligence. It's to say, no, I'm not going to think of that. I'm not going to think of that. I'm going to think of this. So you're disciplining the mind. You see, so that that ability to concentrate comes from the intelligence, and that will, when we get trained in doing that, we'll be able to control the lower self by the higher self, which is coming up in a couple of verses. That's the key element. You control the lower self by the higher self. Eventually the lower self stops, forcing you to act against your own best interest. That's a key first step in, progressing in devotional service. So, Prabhupada quotes this verse. Now this is one of his favorites. This was actually uttered by Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Not before the war, but when they met for the solar eclipse, and he went all the way from Dwarka, and the devotees came from Vrindavan. They had a reunion. You remember that wonderful scene? So it's a great context when you realize this, because what's happening is that Krishna's on the back. Krishna's there, and all these great sages come from different planets and everything to see Krishna. And when Vasudev sees them, he's there also. It's fun. He greets them, and he wants to inquire, as all saintly persons do. How can I practice? How can I get self-realization? What's the goal of life, and how can I achieve it? And they're stunned. Here's Krishna, his own son, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is taking it as a son. He's asking how to get self-realization. He's way beyond that already. But it's the etiquette, and so Krishna plays along. And he's describing his own situation as if he were Yasyatma buddhi kunabeti dhatake. So these are different ways in which one can be on the level of a cow or an ass. Now there's also, let's go kara. Kara is an ass, a donkey. Or it can mean, the different ways of combining in Sanskrit, the words. So it can mean it can mean two separate things, a cow or an ass, or one can modify the other. A donkey that carries the forage to feed the cows, you see? So it can be a specific donkey, the kind of donkey that does it. Anyway, it's not very good. You'll be on the animal level. So let's go through the Yasyatma buddhi kunapetri dhatake. So the idea is the buddhi, the D, the buddhi, you see that? And the buddhi and D means conception in this context. The conception that the self is the bag, koila kunape, like a cadaver, which is three dhatus. This is Ayurveda. Mucus, bile, and air. Which one of those is very attractive? That's romantic. You see? That's what's in the body. And when it mixes up, it's where you get blood, you get pus, you get other. That's really, you can imagine if the skin was transparent, would there be any attraction between male and female? If you could actually see inside that body? You see how what an illusion the whole thing is? If it's a little older, a few wrinkles, no attraction. A little too much fat on this side, no attraction. Bad smell, no attraction. Everything's got to be just perfect. So I'm a bag. Now listen, think of this. I thought of this some time ago. The mercy of the Lord in terms of deity worship. This is my own little realization here. That Krishna, first of all, he appears by the efforts of the pure devotee to come and here we are in the middle of the lecha dish, to be served by the yavanas and the unclean souls. But there's Radha Giridhari's been there for over 40 years, 50 years almost. It's miraculous. All on the prayers and the efforts of the pure devotee, Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so we train, now we have trained pujaris and everything. Okay, that's good. They're wonderful. All glories to the pujari crew. But really what's happening there is that that the altar is a very pure place. You can't bring anything impure on that altar. That's very important. And periodically clean and cleanse, cow dung and everything. But what about our very bodies? The body is nothing but a bag full of obnoxious substances, and we haul it onto that altar, and we worship the Lord, we touch the body. See how much mercy is involved there? Is that allowing, yes, okay, I'm in the material world, I'm here to give them, so that I can appear so they can see me and serve me. Otherwise, Krishna's too subtle, we can't see the Spirit. So out of His mercy, He allows us to serve Him. And, of course, we have to take a shower and be very clean as possible. But how can you, ultimately, it's unclean. It's just being in the body. So, that's the first thing. If you're convinced that you are the body, which everybody is, until they become enlightened, and read the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita and believe it and understand it and live it, so then you're just like a donkey who carries the forage for the cow. If you think, now, so that's I, and then there's my, svadi, kalatra. It always starts with the kalatra. You know what kalatra means? The wife. That's how you expand your sense of ownership. My wife, Adishu, etc. So that's described by Rishabdev. Punksasri mituni bhavametang tayamato vidya grantamaho. When a man and woman get together and there's some sex attraction or a sex life, then the knots in the heart are tied very tight. And then it expands. Griha, Cheta, Sutta, Apta, Vittai. Atta Griha, Cheta, Sutta, Apta, Vittai. So what are those? First is, you need a job. No, I'm sorry. The first thing, you need a place where you can have the sex life. So Atta Griha. Then you need a job, or you need a source of money, some land, traditionally, but basically it's some source of money, where you can support the Griha. So that's Chetra, land, job. Then then there's children. Sutta, sons, daughters. That's another big responsibility. The heart becomes tightly bound by all that. And then apta, our relatives and the whole extended family, friendship, the whole thing. And to support it all, you need vitta, you need so much wealth. And in this way, janasya moha yamahamameti. this generates more and more of that illusion of I and mine. I am this body, and this is my wife. In relation to this body, these children come out of my body. Everything body, body, body. So that's Swadi Kalatradishu. There's a short way of saying that, what I just described from Rishabdev. Then another big one is Boma Ijadi. Alex, you have an idea what that means? What is Boma? It sounds is similar to Bhumi, land. Is Ija, D. Ija would mean worshipable. To think that the land you're born in is worshipable. Nationalism, patriotism, which is very close to, racism and all of this stuff. So, this is all, illusion. And then there's a line in here about, okay, well, I'm a religious person. I go to the holy places once a year. We make a pilgrimage, and we take a bath, and then we come back. That's also donkey, mentality. Without searching out the learned persons there and taking instructions from them. That's why Prabhupada insisted the temples, because he knew from experience from India, if it's just ringing the bells, and there's no discourse, there's no teaching, as people lose their attraction. And then the pujari is there ringing, and he's just opening the curtains to get the donations so he can pay his enough rupees in it. It becomes corrupted. So there has to be the teachings. That means the teachers also. And there are, traditionally at the holy places, these temples are meant to be little holy places that they're established outside of India. So all of that together, that I'm the body, three dhatus, mucus, spinal, and air, my wife, children, etc., are mine. Then if I'm a religious person, it's just superficial. I just go, but I really don't understand anything. Then that's foolish mentality. So that's expansion of what Krishna is describing here. When the senses, mind, and intelligence are infused with material desire, and you're bound by those desires, and you have to act this way, that way, to your detriment. Advertising the liquor, or they don't advertise the cigarettes anymore, but still people smoke. I mean, I'm shocked. When I was a kid, I smoked for about 6 years. When I started at 15. Everybody was doing it. It was on the pictures, or your heroes were smoking. So, and there were advertisements at that time. Eventually, it's so bad, it was people getting cancer, that they said, no, you can't advertise, especially the children. But, and it was like 50 cents a pack, 50 cents a pack for Marlboros. All my friends smoked Marlboros. So now it's like $7 a pack, or $8, Really? Unbelievable. And there's still millions of people who smoke, after all of this. So it's a perfect, illustration of this passage. Against their will, right on the package, ruining your health. I gotta have it, So we want to try to get out of that. And the next verse gives us encouragement for doing it. Text 41, 177. Tasmatam indriyanyado niyamya bharatarshapa papmanam pratihiyenam. I'm sorry, page 177. Jnana vijnana nashanam. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharats, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Purport. The Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization and specific knowledge of the self. Jnana refers to knowledge of self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnan refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Soul. Now, Prabhupada would sometimes call it scientific knowledge, meaning direct experience. We know, I know I'm different from this body, but when I actually realize it and experience it viscerally, that's Vijnan. It is explained thus in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.31. I'll say you say, Jnanam paramaguyam me yad vijnana samanvitam sadahasyam tadangam cha grahana gaditam maya. The knowledge of the self and supreme self is very confidential and mysterious. But such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects by the Lord himself. The Bhagavad Gita gives us that general and specific knowledge of the self. The living entities are parts and parcels of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna conscious and act accordingly. Lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. Now that's a sentence we should emblazon in our brains. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So from any stage of life, or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. There it is. That's the whole summary of what this movement is all about. And I would assume that most of us, I don't know if all of us, maybe you had some Krishna consciousness from childhood. Not so much, huh? Anyway, we're all late beginners, you know. But because this process is so powerful, specifically congregational chanting of the holy name, and the rest of the process that we're beginning, which is integrated, has integrated that, anyone can be purified, depending on our sincerity in taking the process. And notice how it begins with controlling the senses. So we have this verse about the 6 principles of surrender, and that has the same idea. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya bharjanam. Those two. Anukulyasya sankalpa means accepting those things favorable for devotional service and rejecting those things unfavorable. So there's a big list on both sides, and the more that we can accept what's favorable and reject what's unfavorable, the more we'll progress. Really, before you begin, you have to reject what's unfavorable. It's like a fire, right? The lust is a fire. So somehow you have to stop that long enough to take part in the process of devotional service. You know, if you're gonna read Prabhupada's books, that means you have to stop reading all the other books, you know, or putting your attention elsewhere, and draw it away and put it in Prabhupada's books. Krishna consciousness is so attractive. The Sunday feast is designed to attract people to the chanting and the dancing and the feasting. And maybe I don't know about the chanting and dancing, but that feasting is good. So let me go. You know, that was the whole idea, and it worked. Still works. Because if you come for the feasting, well, before the feasting, there's the chanting and dancing, and that talk, that boring talk that you have to sit through before you get to. But some of it sinks through. And the prasadam is purifying in and of itself, and hopefully is so nicely prepared that it'll bring you back next week. So the idea is that it's just like somehow or other we have to find a way. You know, Krishna engineered it, and Prabhupada is so expert to place the attention and the mind of the conditioned souls, even for some time, on Krishna. And if we get him in a kirtan, you know. And now, you know, such highly developed kirtan, you know, keep progressing. He keeps getting better and better. The drumming and the kirtan, you know, and the music is innately attractive, and there's the holy name there. You know, it doesn't matter that people are, you know, maybe not, they don't know what's going on. The holy name is so powerful that it immediately affects the soul and wiping away some of that lust, however, you know, so much, and turning it into attraction for Krishna. So it's up to us, really, how fast we want to go. It's all depending on sincerity. You know, how much we want to stop thinking of these things, however gross or subtle, that are keeping us from, you know, absorbing ourselves in Krishna. And that's why, this is where this idea of prayer comes in. it's been said, I think, earlier today, that practically the whole process is one of prayer. Certainly the chanting can be thought of as a prayer. Prabhupada taught us that. Because the idea in prayer is that I need help in coming to you. I'm so much caught up in different varieties of lusty desires and things, and doubts and whatever. But I do have faith that you exist, and here's, I'm just praying. Please, take away these desires and place my mind at your lotus feet. Engage me in your service. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And there's so many beautiful prayers in the, Bhagavatam. The one, Kunti's prayers were some of Prabhupada's favorites, and she really comes at the end of her prayers, this famous one, most of you have heard this. Tvai me ananya vishaya, mati madhapate sakrit, ratamun bhataradha, gange baugamadhanvati. O Madhu's Lord, please ever fill my mind with thoughts of thee, not any other kind. As Ganges torrent flows into the sea, let all my love flow constantly to thee. Anyone can pray like that. Come before Radha Giridhari. It's good to adopt some of these prayers of the great soul of Prahlad Maharaj, Bhishma Dev. He's lying on the bed, of arrows. It's so dramatic. Krishna's right there, Arjuna's there. So many great sages and demigods come to see. And then he goes into this mood, or his time, everything, because he can control it, right? And he starts chanting all these, what I call nectar verses, beautiful meter, This is the first one, I think. Chubavanakammanang tamalabanang rabakata godavarambalang dadani and vapadolakakulavatana vijayasake ratarastu mena vadya. Chubavanakammanam. He's most attractive in all three worlds. Tamalavarnam, with the beautiful color of a tamal tree, dark bluish black. Ravikata, Ravikata Gora. You know what the Ravikata means? What are the hands of the sun? The rays, right? He knows. So, Ravikata Gora Varambarang, beautiful garments covering his body that are shining like the sun. Ravikata Gora Varambarang Dadhani. Beautiful lotus face surrounded by those curly blackish locks, he's looking right at Krishna. Vijayasake. We have Vijay here, Arjun, the victor, the friend of the victor, Arjun. Vijayasake Ratarastu me navadya. May my attraction be drawn to him and not be diverted to anyone else. It's a prayer. That's what we want, right? So anyway, that prayerfulness, what does that do? At least while you're praying, you focus your real desire, you're uttering a desire, and you're directing it toward Krishna, and means that you have faith that he can fulfill that prayer and overcome the great mountain of material desires that we've accumulated, because we're bound up. It's describing here. So that prayerfulness is important in our meditation and our calling out to Krishna through the holy name. It all depends. There's a beautiful verse, again by Queen Kunti. And this, Janmaishwarya Shuta Shribir, Edamana Madakpama, Naiba Hattibadatam Dvaitama Kinchana Gochara. Now, this verse was misedited many, many years ago, and so most of the devotees know it. It's not super bad, but it kind of obscures the actual meaning. It's all about chanting the name. It's all about the attitude, the feeling when chanting the name. So she's saying, Janmaishwarya Shuddha be the Edamana Madak Puman. Madak means intoxication or madness. Well, those who are increasingly mad after these four basic opulences, good birth, wealth, education, and physical beauty, and are progressively more intoxicated by them. They don't have the adhikari, they don't have the qualification to address you with deep feeling. Because tvama kinchana goes to them. You are the property of those who claim no property in this world. That's the significance of this word, a kinchana. It's the same as a nishkinchana. You may be a millionaire, but if you realize that this all belongs to Krishna, like Ambarish Das, amazing, he has great fortune, And you may not know this, but we know that he's such an important figure in the TOVP. You know, so much of the money came from him, and of course he's helped raise so many millions more. But back in the early 80s, when there was so much confusion in ISKCON, he on his own spent millions putting up in Mayapur the Samadhi tomb of Srila Prabhupada. Have you pushed for Samadhi? You know, you've seen that? You visited? You know, yeah. He built that. You know, and it was a big thing. It took years to raise it up, you know. But he showed that you can have a lot of money, but the perfection of it is to use it in glorification. So it's a question of feeling possessiveness. If you feel it, belongs to Krishna. But a Kinchana Gochara. So what the translation said, my dear Krishna, those who are too much intoxicated with this desire for wealth, good birth, education, and beauty cannot approach you. How's it go? Instead of address you with deep feeling, they said they cannot approach you. Anyway, it's been fixed. If you'd see that one volume Bhagavatam we hand out as kind of a teaser, the first 8 chapters of the first canto, a little blue book, it's fixed in there and in the database. But yeah, okay, here. Let me I can tell you. Oh, stupid. Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. I should know this by heart, but I don't. Okay, here's 1:826. So the way it reads now is, my Lord, your Lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling. Now, this wasn't noted because it makes perfect sense, and that word approach is used. But what Prabhupada really wrote in the first canto, you can look it up. My Lord, your Lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted, because one who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and beauty, cannot address you with sincere feeling. You see, Prabhupada had the word, he had a phrase after material exhausted, period, because. But that because, it should have been comma, because it's all, one sentence. In other words, easily approached. How is it easily approached? By chanting your name. That's the easy approach. And so it's a question that they can't address you with sincere feeling if you're too much intoxicated with the desire for material wealth and beauty and all these things. You see it? That's it. And if you read the purport, it's all about that. Anyone can chant the holy name, but there is a quality to that chanting. That's a quote from that purport. It's a very important verse in purport. Because that's what is it that, why aren't we chanting purely? Because we still have some desires for this and our mind is still on it and it's in the way. But those who don't at all, are not at all concerned with these things, then their mind is free and we can chant to Krishna with complete feeling. So that's the yoga process by which we can tasmatvam inayanyado. In the beginning means if you're going to start the yoga, you have to withdraw the mind and the intention from matter and all of these ideas that are floating around the brain, and control the senses and fix the mind and senses on the holy name or on Krishna. In this way, we can conquer over the sinful enemy, lust. Okay. So now, this is a very interesting verse, text 42. Indriyani paranyahu indriyebhyak parang manaha manasastu para buddhir yo buddhe padatastu saha. So here comes the idea of controlling the lower self by the higher self. Very important. The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Purport. The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is reserved within the body, but is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness, or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions, as described here, ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If, therefore, the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses, and the mind is superior to the sense objects. If, therefore, the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Padam drishtra nivartate. Remember that famous verse? Vishayava nivartante. 259. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger, and even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So this brings up the topic of memorization. Oh my God. But think about it. I mean, I've experienced this. When you find some verse, you know it's important. You got a list of verses probably quoted all the time. Okay, so you put your mind on it. That's why Prabhupada painstakingly created these word-by-word meetings. The Sanskrit without the word-by-words doesn't help much. So, but with the word-by-words, you can actually memorize the important verse and put it in your pocket. I always said like putting a valuable jewel in your pocket, because that's a meditation. Prabhupada said all of these verses, both here in the Bhagavatam, they're all mantras, And if you find a verse, this whole section here, from 336 to the end, Arjuna's question and this whole discourse on lust and the senses is worth memorizing. It's so cogent, And this is a nice way of controlling the mind and placing it on Krishna. And I have these two general categories of verses, There's the philosophy verses, which are plenty, and there's the nectar verses. Now, there's some overlap, But the point is that, okay, two devotees are on, I've experienced this. You're on a plane ride, or you're on a bus ride, or a train ride with devotees, All right, what do? Well, we read to each other, That's a nice way of passing the time. But you can also, share verses that nice expressions, beauty about Krishna. There's what is that verse? There's a verse about that. Several verses. Parasparanu katanam pavanam Bhagavad Gita. Mitodati mitastushta nivrita mitar atmanaha. I think it goes. So parasparanu katana means devotees get together and amongst each other they're speaking about Krishna. Anukatanam. What do they think? Pavanam Bhagavad Gita. The fame, the glories of Bhagavan, which are so purifying. And when they do that, then mitos ratir, they develop nice, loving relations with each other. Mitos tushtir, a mutual satisfaction. And they nourish each other's detachment from matter. This is the basic principle of Krishna, of sadhu sangha. That's why these classes are here. So, I should probably have a special class, on a different day, on just memorizing. We used to have, I printed it out, this is long ago. You remember Arya Siddhanta? Did you meet him? He was part of it. The Brahma Samhita. There's no question Prabhupada relished those verses, he recorded them, he chanted them over. And this Chintamani prayers, the Govinda prayers. Vainam Kwanantam Hadavinda Dalaya Taksham Bharhavatang Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandapakoti Kamaniya Vishesha Shobham Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. It's a meditation. Vainam Kwanantam, playing that flute beautifully, Adavinda Dalaya Taksham, the long, like lotus petals, eyes. Dalaya Taksham, Bharhavatangsam, a beautiful plume, ornament, peacock plume. Asita, not white, in other words, a little blackish. Asitambura, like a cloud. Asitambura Sundarangam, the beautiful limbs, like a fresh rain cloud. Kanda Pakoti Kamaniya, attracting millions of cupids. In other words, that's where your lust could be sublimated, by fixing it, your mind on Krishna service. Vishesha Shobham, all the details, of the beauty. This is the Govinda, the original person whom I worship. And Prabhupada said, and in Bhaktisiddhanta's purports, it's a summary of the Bhagavatam. The philosophy is there, and then you have this description of the spiritual world at the end, which is another meter. Shriya Kanta Padama Purusha Kalpataravo Dhuma Bhumi Chanda Managana Mahito Himamatam. This is Lord Brahma describing his realization of Goloka. All the beauties there, the Lakshmis, they have their one lover in Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead. And all the walking is dancing, and the talking is singing, and one can always hear Krishna's flute in the distance, It absorbs the mind. And then there's no question, then it's not controlled by lust anymore. So, we'll start doing that, maybe. Nectar verses. Any final questions or comments? We didn't finish the chapter. We'll do that tomorrow. Where is that? It's over there. Let's see if it has any power. Oh.
Yeah. While
God, you can take it off. Just for that. Take the mask off for that, so we can hear you.
Yeah. So while you were speaking in the class, one point which struck to me was like, outsiders. If we talk to them about Krishna consciousness or philosophy or anything, they say that you are, imposing it. You are, preaching. They tag the term preaching, and they say that, this is preaching. This is not talking. This is preaching. But after hearing what you were talking about the Sunday feast and everything, I feel that is required, because outside we all get preached by the technology, by so many things. So, and they are only being one-sided by only saying that only, if we speak philosophy, that we are preaching.
Yeah. So. Well, there's this consideration of time, place, and circumstance, and candidate. So the best thing is to learn the art of how to present Krishna consciousness so that they don't feel that they're being preached to and you're trying to convert me. Talk to Vijay. He has 42 years of experience distributing these books. And how you can, because the books, once they get a book in their hand, then they can choose, I can't be preached to because they can always close the book. But if they actually open it and they're curious, then immediately they're getting the best preaching, from Prabhupada. But, the art of them feeling friendship from you, that you really care about them, which they don't get from anyone else. The whole world, this whole world is, people are pretending to like you so that you'll buy what they have to sell. It's all a big scam. But if they can feel the sincerity of the devotee, this is a unique thing, and a certain number of people are open to that, to listen to you, and how what you have may actually benefit them, and you feel. So yeah, it's an art of doing that, and that's how people become interested, because they don't. It's something unique. Here's someone who's trying to give me something that can really help me to navigate some of the terrible things that are going on. To deal with. So it's an art. But yeah, we need to. You're right. We're being preached to. It's coming from all directions, and so we have to be very strong in ourselves and to not be afraid to propagate process. Okay, we're at the time where we need to stop and move on to our deity worship, and we will finish this chapter tomorrow for sure. And thank you for our guests in Internet land. Hare Krishna.